Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we are going to stare directly into the darkest, most terrifyingly misunderstood aspect of the physical universe, aggressively dismantling a concept so fundamentally woven into your biological sanity that its destruction will leave you completely untethered from the macroscopic world you inherently trust. We are going to confront the paralyzing question: zero-point energy. Is the void actually brimming with power? To find the agonizing, reality-breaking answer, we must violently journey into the absolute, freezing depths of empty space and face the horrifying truth of what truly exists in the dark. Our fragile, strictly biological minds have been deeply, relentlessly conditioned over millions of years of brutal evolutionary history to fear the dark. We are visual, terrestrial mammals, and the absence of light represents the agonizing unknown, a chaotic environment where our crude sensory organs completely fail, and the statistical threat of violent biological death mathematically spikes. But paradoxically, while we fiercely fear the physical dark of a predator-filled forest, we possess an incredibly desperate, almost pathological psychological need to find comfort in the abstract concept of emptiness. We view nothingness as the ultimate state of rest, a sanctuary from the unyielding thermodynamic friction of daily existence. We intuitively define a vacuum as the absolute, pristine absence of matter, a silent, dead, and entirely peaceful void. When we imagine the vast, sprawling, freezing distances between the dying stars, we aggressively project our own biological desire for tranquility onto the cosmos. We imagine the universe as a silent, unmoving theater, a perfectly flat, dead, and featureless stage just passively waiting for the dynamic actors of physical matter and brilliant energy to make their grand, temporary entrance. To truly comprehend the suffocating horror of our upcoming revelation, you must first construct this perfect, classical vacuum in your mind. Imagine building the ultimate, impenetrable cosmic vault. You construct thick, incredibly dense, lead-lined walls to completely block out the chaotic, high-energy, cosmic rays violently expelled by detonating supernovae across the galaxy. You aggressively, mechanically pump out every single stray molecule of atmospheric gas, every microscopic speck of ancient silicate dust, and every wandering carbon atom. You then plunge this perfectly isolated chamber down to the absolute, unyielding thermodynamic floor of absolute zero, completely draining away the chaotic, vibrating thermal heat that relentlessly jiggles the foundational bedrock of macroscopic reality. You have mathematically, physically eradicated every single trace of substance, every single microscopic spark of heat, and every single screaming photon of light. According to the comforting, clockwork logic of classical physics, and according to the desperate, hallucinating intuition of your own slow, wet primate brain, you have finally achieved it. You have created pure, tranquil, unadulterated nothingness. You proudly believe you have forged a pocket of the universe that is entirely dead, a perfectly silent sanctuary where absolutely nothing can ever happen, a true and permanent zero. But the cold, mathematically ruthless, and profoundly alien reality of modern quantum physics is preparing to violently shatter this comforting delusion into a billion unrecognizable pieces. When we aggressively strip away the primitive limitations of our biological sensory organs and peer directly into the raw, unforgiving equations that physically govern the subatomic basement of the cosmos, we uncover a truth that completely, mercilessly nullifies human logic. Absolute nothingness is mathematically, structurally forbidden by the universe. The darkest, coldest, and most perfectly isolated vacuum you can possibly construct in the entire physical cosmos is absolutely not empty. The concept of a dead, silent void is a pathetic, macroscopic lie generated by a universe that actively, aggressively despises stillness. The agonizing, reality-breaking truth is that the empty space currently occupying the microscopic gaps between the carbon atoms in your own DNA and the sprawling, freezing expanse of the intergalactic void are absolutely identical in their underlying, terrifying nature. The void is not a peaceful, dead stage. It is a roaring, violently churning ocean of infinite, inaccessible power. It is a boiling, hyper-energetic monster. When you successfully remove all the classical matter and actively drain away all the classical heat, you absolutely do not reach a state of peaceful, dormant zero. You violently crash headfirst into the fundamental, unyielding baseline of quantum reality, a subatomic baseline that is permanently, mechanically vibrating with an unfathomable amount of localized kinetic chaos. The universe, mathematically, refuses to sit still. The emptiness is screaming. We arrogantly walk through our daily macroscopic lives, moving our heavy, decaying meat machines through the atmospheric gases of our dying planet, completely convinced that the space around us is a passive, empty container. We look up at the freezing, indifferent night sky, and we feel a profound, existential loneliness, mistakenly believing that we are tiny, isolated sparks of warm life, completely surrounded by an infinite ocean of dead, silent nothingness. But the absolute terror of zero-point energy is the realization that you are not surrounded by death. You are completely submerged in an overwhelming, chaotic, and violently active ocean of raw, unbridled quantum power. The void is teeming with an invisible, frantic energy that is constantly, relentlessly bubbling just beneath the extremely thin, incredibly fragile threshold of your biological perception. You are a blind, deaf organism floating in the exact mathematical center of a continuous thermonuclear detonation, completely oblivious to the deafening roar of the vacuum because your physical, biological senses are mathematically calibrated to completely ignore the baseline noise. Consider the profound arrogance of human philosophy and classical science. We spent centuries drawing meticulous, incredibly detailed maps of the cosmos, carefully charting the heavy, glowing spheres of burning plasma and the cold, dead rocks violently orbiting them, aggressively and lazily labeling everything else as empty space. We treated the void as a mere mathematical distance, a boring, featureless gap that light and gravity simply had to painfully cross. But the quantum revolution violently inverted this reality. The empty space is actually the primary, dominant substance of the cosmos. The violently burning stars, the frozen planets, and your incredibly brief, highly unstable biological body are nothing more than microscopic, temporary impurities floating inside this infinite, boiling ocean. You are a localized, highly offensive structural glitch in a universe that is fundamentally defined by its roaring, hyper-energetic emptiness. The vacuum is the absolute main event of reality, and the solid matter you so desperately trust is just a trivial statistical afterthought. And what makes this realization truly paralyzing, what completely suffocates the human ego, is the tantalizing, agonizing nature of this zero-point energy. It is an ocean of infinite power that is mathematically woven into the very coordinates of space itself, yet it remains completely, aggressively inaccessible to us. We are desperately burning finite, rotting fossil fuels on the surface of a rapidly dying rock, violently tearing apart heavy atomic nuclei in supercooled fission reactors just to keep the fragile, temporary lights of our human civilization flickering for a few more pathetic centuries. We wage brutal, planetary wars over microscopic scraps of chemical energy, while simultaneously existing inside a vacuum that is practically bursting at the subatomic seams with raw quantum power. The universe is actively, relentlessly mocking our desperation. It has completely surrounded us with a boiling, hyper-energetic storm of unimaginable magnitude, but the unyielding laws of thermodynamics structurally forbid us from ever drinking a single drop of it. We are dying of thirst while permanently, inescapably drowning in the deepest, most energetic ocean in existence. The illusion of nothingness is the ultimate, necessary psychological shield. If you could truly perceive the void, if your slow, wet neurological architecture could somehow instantly process the screaming, violent quantum fluctuations actively happening in the seemingly empty space just inches from your face, your fragile, highly ordered ego would instantaneously shatter under the sheer, crushing thermodynamic weight of that chaotic reality. You would be permanently, biologically paralyzed by the horrific realization that true peace, true silence, and true stillness absolutely do not exist anywhere in the physical universe, and mathematically never will. The void is awake. It is constantly churning, violently breathing in the dark, and mercilessly maintaining a baseline of frantic, terrifying energy that serves as the unyielding, vibrating foundation for all physical matter. You have spent your entire life believing the monster was hiding in the dark, completely failing to realize that the dark itself is the monster, a boiling sea of infinite energy that actively despises your fragile, localized existence. To truly comprehend the reality-breaking nature of the boiling vacuum and to completely dismantle the comforting, deeply ingrained delusion that the universe is capable of achieving a state of peaceful emptiness, we must forcefully confront the absolute, unyielding dictator of the quantum realm. We must aggressively strip away the heavily romanticized, classical view of physics that our primitive, macroscopic sensory organs desperately rely upon, and stare directly into the terrifying mathematical architecture laid down by the fundamental laws of nature. We must examine the suffocating, inescapable grip of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, a concept that is not merely a frustrating limitation of our scientific measuring devices, but a violent, structural mandate that permanently outlaws the very concept of stillness. It is the ultimate tyranny of the cosmos, a rigid mathematical law that dictates that the foundational fabric of reality is entirely biologically incapable of ever finding rest. We are sluggish, biological creatures heavily bound by the unyielding friction of thermodynamics, and because of this, we possess an overwhelming, almost pathological psychological need to believe in the concept of absolute cessation. We violently require a period of unconscious sleep to prevent our fragile, wet neural networks from collapsing under the chaotic weight of daily sensory input. We observe the macroscopic world around us, a heavy stone resting silently in a frozen field, or a highly engineered vehicle perfectly parked and completely drained of kinetic momentum, and we arrogantly extrapolate this localized, highly edited biological hallucination to the absolute limits of the cosmos. We inherently believe that if you isolate a physical system, if you forcefully drain away all of its external thermal heat, and if you completely shield it from all chaotic outside interference, it will eventually, inevitably settle into a state of perfect, mathematically absolute stillness. We desperately want to believe that the universe, at its core, desires to be dead, silent, and entirely at peace. But the mathematically ruthless, profoundly alien basement of subatomic reality completely and violently rejects this human intuition. When Werner Heisenberg formulated his terrifying principle nearly a century ago, he did not just discover a quirky, counterintuitive behavioral trait of microscopic particles. He uncovered the fundamental, inescapable anxiety of the universe itself. The uncertainty principle mathematically dictates that the cosmos absolutely refuses to allow any physical entity to possess both a perfectly defined, absolute position in space and a perfectly defined, absolute momentum at the exact same fraction of a microsecond. In the macroscopic world of our daily hallucination, this concept seems entirely absurd. You can easily, precisely measure the exact location of a speeding bullet and simultaneously calculate its exact, unyielding kinetic velocity. But as you aggressively plunge into the subatomic depths, the universe violently fights back against this level of absolute definition. If you attempt to construct an incredibly tiny, theoretically perfect microscopic cage to trap a solitary, wandering electron, you are attempting to force the universe to assign that particle an exact, unyielding spatial coordinate. But the uncertainty principle is a zero-sum tyrannical equation. The more aggressively you squeeze the particle, the more precisely you attempt to pin down its physical location in the dark, the more violently and uncontrollably its momentum mathematically explodes. It does not simply sit quietly in the absolute center of your conceptual trap. It begins to frantically, violently thrash against the walls of its mathematical confinement, vibrating with an incomprehensible, chaotic kinetic energy that is entirely generated by the very act of its restriction. You cannot force the universe to be precise. The fundamental building blocks of matter are completely, structurally forbidden from being nailed down to a single, dead point in physical space. However, the true, paralyzing, existential horror of this mathematical dictatorship does not merely apply to the physical coordinates of a traveling particle. This tyrannical principle aggressively extends its suffocating grip to the very concept of energy itself. In the comforting, strictly linear reality constructed by your biological meat machine, zero is an entirely valid, highly common mathematical state. You can possess exactly zero atmospheric pressure in a perfectly sealed vacuum chamber, or you can possess exactly zero kinetic energy when an object is completely, permanently frozen in place. We arrogantly believe that zero is the foundational, unyielding baseline of the cosmos. But in the violent, chaotic architecture of quantum mechanics, exactly zero energy is a state of absolute, mathematically perfect precision. To confidently declare that a localized quantum field or a completely isolated subatomic particle possesses precisely zero energy for a defined period of time is to claim a level of absolute, unyielding certainty that the uncertainty principle explicitly, violently forbids. Because the universe mathematically outlaws perfect precision, it absolutely, structurally, forbids the existence of true zero. A quantum system can never, under any hypothetical or physically engineered circumstance, possess exactly zero energy. It is a fundamental, physical impossibility. The universe physically refuses to sit still, even when you aggressively strip away every single screaming photon of light, even when you violently expel every stray atom of atmospheric gas, and even when you painstakingly isolate a vacuum chamber from the chaotic, high-energy cosmic rays bombarding the planet. The localized quantum fields remaining inside that completely empty space are mathematically forced to maintain a baseline of erratic, violently churning power. They are permanently, inescapably jittering in the dark. This brings us to the ultimate, reality-breaking paradox of absolute zero. For centuries, classical thermodynamic physicists theorized that absolute zero, the terrifying temperature of 0 Kelvin, or roughly minus 273 degrees Celsius, was the ultimate, final death of all physical movement. It was the absolute thermodynamic flaw, the freezing, unyielding state where all chaotic molecular vibrations would violently cease, and matter would finally, permanently achieve a state of perfect, silent equilibrium. But when modern researchers aggressively push highly complex, supercooled isotopes down to microscopic fractions of a single degree above this theoretical absolute limit, they do not find a peaceful, frozen graveyard. The closer they drag physical matter to the brink of absolute thermal death, the more violently the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics intervene. As the classical, macroscopic heat is aggressively drained away into the surrounding liquid helium baths, the atoms do not freeze into a state of tranquil stillness. Instead, they are violently forced into a state of perpetual, agonizing vibration by the unyielding dictates of Heisenberg's tyrant. Because their momentum cannot be perfectly zero without violently violating the fundamental architecture of reality, they must continue to jitter, thrash, and vibrate even when every single drop of external thermal energy has been completely eradicated. They are shivering in the absolute dark, not from the cold, but from the fundamental, mathematical anxiety permanently wired into their subatomic existence. This frantic, inescapable, and permanently unyielding baseline of vibration is the zero-point energy. It is the minimum, non-zero energy state that the universe demands simply to exist. The psychological dread of this realization completely shatters the fragile human ego. We are forced to confront a reality where the cosmos is deeply, fundamentally, and permanently neurotic. The universe is not a majestic, perfectly balanced clockwork machine slowly ticking its way toward a peaceful, dormant equilibrium. It is an infinitely sprawling, hyper-energetic entity suffering from a state of perpetual, vibrating anxiety. It is structurally incapable of experiencing peace. The emptiness between the stars is not a quiet sanctuary. It is a violently restless ocean of quantum potential, constantly churning and boiling, strictly because the unyielding mathematics of its own existence completely forbid it from ever stopping. You must painfully accept that the solid, stable reality you currently perceive is an incredibly elaborate, heavily edited biological lie. The heavy, unyielding chair you are sitting on, the dense, highly ordered calcium structures of your own bones, and the seemingly silent, empty air currently filling your lungs are not static physical objects. They are entirely constructed upon a subatomic foundation of absolute, screaming kinetic panic. The fundamental particles that physically manifest your incredibly brief, biological existence are violently, relentlessly thrashing against the mathematical confines of their own quantum state, billions of times every single microsecond. You are completely blind to this horrifying microscopic violence strictly because your sluggish sensory organs are thermodynamically incapable of registering the baseline noise of the void. but the vibration is always there. The zero-point energy is the chaotic, agonizing heartbeat of a universe that is permanently, mechanically restless, a cosmos actively held hostage by a mathematical law that aggressively demands infinite, unending motion, completely denying the existence of peace to every single atom in the dark. If the unyielding mathematical dictates of the uncertainty principle guarantee that the universe is structurally forbidden from ever achieving a state of absolute rest, we are violently forced to ask a deeply unsettling, reality-breaking question: what exactly is doing the vibrating? When you aggressively strip away every single atom of tangible physical matter, every wandering, highly energetic electron, and every blinding photon of light from a perfectly sealed, supercooled vacuum chamber, what exactly is left in the freezing dark to carry the frantic, inescapable baseline of the zero-point energy? To answer this paralyzing question, we must aggressively dismantle yet another comforting, heavily romanticized macroscopic delusion. We possess a pathetic, deeply ingrained biological habit of viewing the empty vacuum of space as a passive, sterile container. We visualize it as an inert, three-dimensional geometric box that simply holds the tangible, burning objects of the cosmos. But modern quantum mechanics completely, violently obliterates this notion. Space is absolutely not an empty box. The very foundation of our universe, the invisible bedrock upon which all physical reality is constructed, is composed entirely of a sprawling, infinitely complex, and omnipresent architecture known as quantum fields. You must forcefully condition your sluggish, terrestrial mind to visualize reality not as a collection of solid, isolated objects floating in a dead void, but as a series of overlapping, infinite, and incredibly tense physical mediums. Every fundamental particle in the cosmos, every single electron, every up quark, every ghost-like neutrino is absolutely not a tiny, hard, classical billiard ball. Instead, a particle is merely a localized, highly energetic excitation, a violent, temporary mathematical spike in its corresponding, universe-spanning quantum field. These invisible, underlying fields penetrate absolutely everything. They aggressively saturate the frozen, infinite vacuum between the dying galaxies. They violently pierce through the dense, crushing gravitational singularity of a supermassive black hole, and they completely, inescapably saturate the fragile, wet biological meat machine you arrogantly call your body. Under the comforting, macroscopic hallucination of classical physics, if a specific quantum field contains no physical particles, it should theoretically lie perfectly flat, utterly silent, and completely dormant. It should be a dead, frozen ocean with a perfectly glassy, unmoving surface. But as we have already agonizingly established, the cosmic tyrant Heisenberg permanently, mathematically outlaws a perfectly flat, zero-energy state. Therefore, these foundational, universe-spanning fields cannot sit still. They are aggressively forced by the unforgiving thermodynamics of the cosmos to perpetually, violently ripple. The vacuum is fundamentally boiling. These endless, chaotic ripples in the freezing dark are not harmless, abstract mathematical vibrations contained neatly within the equations of theoretical physicists on Earth. They possess a terrifying, immediate physical consequence. In the extreme, reality-breaking environment of the subatomic void, energy and mass are fundamentally, violently interchangeable. When the baseline zero-point energy of a quantum field violently fluctuates upward in a localized, chaotic spasm, that raw, unbridled kinetic energy can spontaneously, mathematically convert itself into physical matter, but the universe is a ruthless, unforgiving accountant. It absolutely refuses to allow physical matter to simply exist for free, and it violently protects the ultimate, unbreakable symmetry of the cosmos. When the boiling void vomits a physical particle into existence, it must simultaneously, violently tear an antiparticle from the exact same mathematical coordinate. This is the terrifying, reality-breaking genesis of virtual particles. In the darkest, emptiest, and most perfectly isolated freezing vacuum imaginable, microscopic pairs of matter and antimatter are continuously, aggressively popping into physical existence out of absolutely nothing. They are subatomic ghosts, violently ripped from the churning ocean of quantum probability. They actively borrow a microscopic fraction of energy from the zero-point void to briefly, agonizingly manifest in the material world. But their existence is a violent, highly unstable thermodynamic crime. The uncertainty principle dictates that the universe will only tolerate this blatant theft of energy for an incredibly brief, entirely unrecordable fraction of a single microsecond. The exact moment these phantom pairs are violently birthed into the dark, the unyielding mathematics of the cosmos immediately, aggressively demand the borrowed energy back. The particle and its corresponding antimatter twin are magnetically, violently drawn back together. They aggressively collide in a microscopic, chaotic apocalypse, instantly annihilating each other and violently returning their borrowed energy back to the boiling vacuum. They completely, permanently erase their own existence before the macroscopic, sluggish universe can even begin to register their presence. This is not a rare, isolated quantum anomaly occurring only in the extreme environments of a dying star. This is a continuous, deafening, and mathematically infinite thermodynamic slaughterhouse occurring everywhere all the time. Billions upon billions of these phantom matter and antimatter pairs are violently born and aggressively murdered in every single microscopic cubic centimeter of empty space, every single unrecordable fraction of a microsecond. The void is not a silent, dead stage awaiting the arrival of matter. It is a violently churning sea of ghosts, a chaotic, invisible frenzy of perpetual subatomic trauma. The true, suffocating, existential horror of this reality does not live out in the freezing expanse of deep space. It completely annihilates the fragile, localized boundaries of your own biological identity. We arrogantly look at the macroscopic world around us, and we feel a deep, comforting sense of solidity. We knock our knuckles against a heavy, unyielding wooden table. We feel the dense, highly ordered calcium structures of our own skeletal framework, and we blindly trust that physical matter is a permanent, stable sanctuary from the howling, radioactive chaos of the cosmic void. But when you aggressively zoom in, plunging past the complex, rotting protein chains, past the heavily entangled DNA strands, and directly into the cold, subatomic architecture of a single carbon atom within your own flesh, this comforting solidity violently evaporates. The standard, sanitized models of chemistry taught to us in our youth aggressively lie to us. They depict the atom as a miniature, orderly solar system, a dense, solid nucleus orbited by a few electrons moving in perfect, clean, and silent geometric trajectories. We are explicitly taught that the vast, overwhelming majority of an atom's volume is simply empty space. But you now know the agonizing, reality-breaking truth about the nature of empty space. The microscopic, internal void existing between the dense nucleus of your atoms and the frantically orbiting electrons is absolutely not empty. It is not a silent, dead gap. It is exactly the same roaring, violently churning ocean of infinite, inaccessible power that fills the freezing expanses between the dying galaxies. The space inside you is boiling. In the exact microsecond it takes your sluggish, wet neurological architecture to process a single, coherent thought, trillions upon trillions of virtual matter and antimatter pairs have violently popped into existence inside the atoms of your own brain, aggressively annihilated each other, and completely vanished back into the dark. Your physical body is entirely saturated by this microscopic, chaotic frenzy of infinite creation and immediate, violent destruction. The subatomic ghosts are swimming through your flesh, bleeding into the quantum fields that dictate your biological existence, completely unbothered by the macroscopic hallucination of your fragile, hallucinating ego. You are not a solid, permanent fixture of the cosmos. You are an incredibly porous, highly unstable biological matrix that is practically entirely composed of a roaring, hyper-energetic vacuum. The reality you so desperately trust, the solid ground you walk upon, and the very atmospheric gases you breathe are nothing more than a microscopic, incredibly thin crust floating desperately on top of a violently churning ocean of infinite quantum ghosts. The universe is actively, relentlessly boiling from the inside out. We spend our entire, incredibly brief biological lives completely terrified of the infinite, dark emptiness of the cosmos, completely failing to realize that the exact same terrifying, hyper-energetic monster is actively, violently roaring inside every single atom of our own bodies. We are built directly out of the storm. The sea of ghosts is not just out there in the freezing dark. It is the fundamental, agonizing bedrock of our physical existence, a permanent, deafening reminder that true stillness, true silence, and true peace are mathematically, violently forbidden by a universe that physically refuses to ever stop dying and being reborn in the dark. When the theoretical physicists of the early 20th century first peered into the agonizing, reality-breaking mathematics of quantum mechanics, they were deeply, psychologically desperate to quarantine the madness. They inherently needed to believe that the violent, churning ocean of virtual particles, the frantic popping into and out of existence of subatomic ghosts, was strictly a mathematical quirk. They arrogantly hoped that this boiling vacuum was nothing more than an abstract accounting trick, a microscopic anomaly permanently confined to the freezing, invisible basement of the cosmos, completely incapable of affecting the solid, comforting, macroscopic reality of our daily lives. We possess a pathetic biological reflex to dismiss what we cannot directly touch or see. If the infinite energy of the void is fundamentally inaccessible, if the phantom matter and antimatter pairs annihilate each other before our sluggish, wet sensory organs can ever register their violent birth, then it is deeply, dangerously easy to pretend they do not exist. We want to believe that the ghosts in the dark are entirely powerless, trapped in a theoretical realm that has absolutely no mechanical bearing on the heavy, unyielding physical matter we blindly trust. But the universe is fundamentally, aggressively hostile to human comfort. The boiling void is absolutely not a theoretical abstraction. It is a roaring, physical monster, and it possesses a crushing, measurable mechanical weight. To completely shatter the illusion of a passive vacuum, we must confront the paralyzing reality of the Casimir effect, the undeniable, physical proof that the invisible storm is actively pushing back. Imagine if you possess the psychological endurance, the construction of the ultimate, perfectly sterile physical experiment. You build an incredibly advanced, heavily shielded vacuum chamber, meticulously stripping away every single stray atom of atmospheric gas and violently pumping the internal environment down to the absolute thermodynamic floor. Within this freezing, dead, and entirely isolated pocket of the cosmos, you place two perfectly smooth, perfectly uncharged metallic plates. You carefully, aggressively strip away any residual static electricity, ensuring there is absolutely no classical electromagnetic attraction between them. You isolate the chamber from the gravitational interference of the massive, rotting planet beneath your feet. In the comforting, classical hallucination of Newtonian physics, these two dead, uncharged pieces of metal hanging in a perfect vacuum should remain perfectly, permanently still. There is no classical force acting upon them. They are surrounded by pure, unadulterated nothingness, and nothingness cannot exert a physical force. But as you mechanically, methodically push these two perfectly flat plates, agonizingly close together, bringing them within a microscopic fraction of a millimeter of one another, a distance narrower than the diameter of a single human hair, the classical architecture of reality completely, violently collapses. The plates do not sit still. Without any external mechanical manipulation, without any classical magnetic attraction, and without any thermal interference, the two heavy metallic plates are aggressively, violently pushed together. They are crushed into one another by an invisible, inexplicable physical force. This is not a microscopic, theoretical nudge. It is a hard, measurable, and highly predictable mechanical pressure that can be physically recorded by our macroscopic scientific instruments. The dead metal is actively responding to the dark. To comprehend the suffocating horror of this physical interaction, you must aggressively recall the fundamental nature of the boiling vacuum. The empty space surrounding those plates is not a dead, geometric box. It is a violently churning ocean of quantum fields, constantly vomiting infinite pairs of virtual particles into physical existence. Outside the two plates, in the sprawling, unrestricted expanse of the vacuum chamber, this chaotic storm of phantom matter can manifest in absolutely any wavelength. The quantum ghosts can pop into existence with vast, sprawling probability waves, crashing against the exterior surfaces of the metallic plates with the full, unyielding fury of the infinite void. The vacuum outside is a roaring, unrestricted thermodynamic hurricane. However, the agonizingly narrow, microscopic gap artificially created between the two plates fundamentally alters the mathematical architecture of the local vacuum. Because the distance between the metal surfaces is so incredibly tight, the universe is physically, structurally forbidden from generating virtual particles with wavelengths larger than the gap itself. The metallic plates act as a violent, macroscopic filter, aggressively suffocating the quantum fields trapped between them. Inside that narrow gap, the boiling ocean is artificially muted. The vast, sprawling probability waves cannot physically fit, and therefore they are mathematically prohibited from popping into existence. This creates a terrifying, reality-breaking differential in the fundamental fabric of space-time. The vacuum aggressively churning on the outside of the plates is infinitely more chaotic, infinitely more populated with violently birthed subatomic ghosts than the artificially restricted vacuum trapped on the inside. The sheer, overwhelming number of virtual particles continuously, violently crashing against the exterior metal surfaces creates a massive, undeniable physical pressure. The plates are not being pulled together by some mysterious internal attraction. They are being actively, brutally crushed together by the sheer weight of the quantum void outside them. The infinite, roaring ocean of nothingness is physically flexing its mechanical muscle, aggressively slamming the macroscopic metal together simply because the universe despises the artificial restriction you placed upon its chaotic baseline. We can physically measure the crushing weight of this quantum void. The Casimir effect is the absolute, undeniable, and physically recorded proof that the empty vacuum of space is a violent, hyper-energetic participant in the material mechanics of our reality. The nothingness is not a passive stage. It is an active, aggressive entity that forcefully pushes back against the physical structures we arrogantly build. When we construct our heavy, highly ordered machines, when we blindly trust the rigid, unyielding permanence of our macroscopic world, we are completely oblivious to the fact that the invisible storm is constantly, relentlessly battering against the atomic shores of our physical existence. The void has measurable pressure. The darkness has physical weight. You are standing at the bottom of an infinite, boiling ocean of quantum probability, and the only reason you are not instantaneously crushed by the absolute, staggering thermodynamic pressure of the vacuum is because your incredibly fragile biological meat machine is entirely permeated by it. This terrifying realization violently scales down from the macroscopic metallic plates directly into the deepest, most foundational architecture of your own physical identity. We desperately, fiercely cling to the illusion that our bodies are solid, that the complex, rotting biological structures that generate our hallucinating egos are built upon a foundation of stable, unmoving physical matter. But when you aggressively peer into the atomic void, when you force your sluggish mind to comprehend the microscopic geometry of the carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen atoms currently constructing your flesh, you find the exact same roaring monster. The distance between the dense, heavy nucleus of your atoms and the frantic, buzzing electron clouds orbiting them is staggering. If the nucleus of a single atom in your DNA were the size of a marble sitting in the absolute center of a massive football stadium, the electrons would be microscopic gnats buzzing violently around the farthest exterior bleachers. The vast, overwhelming majority of your physical body is entirely composed of this empty space. But this internal void is absolutely not a quiet, dead sanctuary. It is exactly the same violently churning ocean of quantum ghosts that aggressively crush the metallic plates together in the laboratory. The empty space inside your own physical flesh is teeming, boiling, and actively overflowing with phantom particles. Trillions upon trillions of virtual matter and antimatter pairs are violently popping into existence within the microscopic gaps of your heavily entangled molecules, aggressively annihilating each other and instantly vanishing back into the dark, billions of times every single microsecond. You are fundamentally, mathematically constructed directly on top of a roaring, chaotic frenzy. Your perceived reality, the solid ground you walk upon, the air you breathe, and the very biological tissues that allow you to read these words are nothing more than a desperately fragile, highly localized structural illusion floating violently on an ocean of invisible trauma. The vacuum is not just out there in the freezing, dead expanses between the dying stars. It is aggressively, permanently residing inside of you. Reality is built directly on top of a violently churning ocean of ghosts, living and dying in a chaotic, invisible frenzy that mathematically underpins every single physical interaction in the cosmos. You are a walking, breathing, and rotting biological sponge, entirely saturated by the infinite, crushing weight of the quantum void, completely blind to the agonizing truth that the nothingness you so deeply fear is the only thing aggressively holding your highly unstable atomic structure together. To truly grasp the absolute, reality-breaking magnitude of the zero-point energy, we must forcefully confront the staggering arrogance of human mathematics. Whenever the sluggish, biological meat machine of the human brain encounters a terrifying, incomprehensible force of nature, our immediate, desperate psychological defense mechanism is to attempt to quantify it. We inherently believe that if we can cage a monster inside a rigid framework of numbers, if we can violently force a chaotic cosmic phenomenon into a neat, digestible algebraic equation, we can somehow strip it of its power and master it. We are a species pathologically obsessed with measurement, convinced that understanding the exact weight, velocity, or temperature of a physical threat will magically protect our fragile, localized existence from its wrath. Therefore, when the theoretical physicists of the 20th century finally accepted the agonizing, undeniable reality that the vacuum of space was not a dead, silent stage, but a violently churning, hyper-energetic ocean of quantum ghosts, their immediate, arrogant instinct was to weigh the storm. They picked up their chalk, stared into the howling, microscopic abyss of the subatomic void, and attempted to calculate exactly how much energy this bubbling nothingness actually contained. The methodology for this calculation seemed, to the classical human mind, brutally straightforward. If the empty vacuum is fundamentally composed of overlapping, universe-spanning quantum fields, and if Heisenberg's unyielding uncertainty principle dictates that every single coordinate of these fields must permanently vibrate with a baseline zero-point energy, then finding the total energy of the vacuum should simply be a matter of addition. The physicists mathematically divided the empty space into an infinite grid of microscopic, vibrating springs, representing the localized fluctuations of the quantum fields. To determine the total thermodynamic weight of the void, they merely had to sum up the minimum kinetic energy of every single possible vibration across every single possible frequency for every single fundamental field in the cosmos. They arrogantly expected the final result to be a microscopic, easily dismissible number, a faint, trivial hum of background radiation that could be safely ignored while they returned to the comfortable, macroscopic mechanics of classical reality. But the cold, unyielding architecture of the universe absolutely despises human comfort, and it violently rejects our attempts to minimize its chaotic power. When the physicists aggressively processed the mathematics, when they meticulously added the baseline vibrations of the electron fields, the quark fields, and the electromagnetic fields, the equations did not politely yield a small, negligible fraction. They did not yield a massive, yet comprehensible, astronomical figure. As the mathematicians calculated the energy of increasingly shorter wavelengths, they hit a terrifying, reality-breaking wall. Because orthodox quantum mechanics fundamentally assumes that space-time is a perfectly smooth, continuous mathematical continuum, there is absolutely no theoretical limit to how incredibly short, and therefore how incomprehensibly energetic, these quantum fluctuations can be. The equations simply kept scaling upward, violently compounding the energy of infinite frequencies into a runaway algorithmic nightmare. The final, inescapable result of summing up the zero-point energy of a perfect vacuum was not a number at all. It was mathematical infinity. This is not a poetic exaggeration or a philosophical metaphor. According to the absolute, foundational mathematics that currently govern our highest understanding of physical reality, the baseline energy of the empty vacuum is literally, structurally infinite. The equations violently shattered, producing a result so staggeringly massive that it completely broke the logical architecture of theoretical physics. The researchers were forced to stare in paralyzing horror at chalkboards that mathematically proved the completely silent, dead, empty space in their laboratories contained more raw, unbridled kinetic energy than all the burning stars, all the supermassive black holes, and all the physical, glowing matter in the entire observable universe combined, multiplied by infinity. The mathematics of madness had aggressively revealed that we are not living in a universe that contains a small amount of background noise. We are living inside a mathematical paradox of unfathomable, world-ending power. To aggressively force your highly restricted, biological perception to comprehend the sheer, suffocating scale of this infinite ocean, we must translate this mathematical anomaly into a localized, macroscopic nightmare. Visualize a standard, unremarkable ceramic coffee cup resting silently on the desk in front of you. Now, in your mind, meticulously strip away the physical matter of the ceramic. Violently pump out every single wandering molecule of oxygen and nitrogen from the atmospheric air inside it. Plunge the internal volume of that cup down to absolute zero, completely eradicating every last microscopic spark of classical thermal heat. You are left with a tiny, localized pocket of pure, pristine vacuum, a volume of empty space, no larger than your own fist. According to the unyielding, foundational equations of quantum field theory, the baseline zero-point energy permanently, violently vibrating inside that single, empty coffee cup is so incomprehensibly massive that, if it were suddenly, mathematically allowed to interact with the classical matter of our macroscopic reality, it would unleash an apocalyptic thermodynamic event that defies human visualization. The raw quantum energy trapped inside that tiny volume of nothingness is theoretically more than enough to instantaneously, violently boil away all the sprawling, deep blue oceans on planet Earth in a single, unrecordable microsecond. It would not merely heat the water, it would aggressively, completely vaporize the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the freezing depths of the Arctic into a chaotic, screaming cloud of superheated plasma. The sheer, crushing kinetic release would violently shatter the planetary crust, instantly melting the silicate mantle and reducing our entire, fragile biological sanctuary into a violently expanding sphere of radioactive ash. All of this staggering, world-ending thermodynamic violence is currently mathematically contained within the microscopic, bubbling vacuum of a single, empty cup. This is the paralyzing, existential dread of the zero-point energy. We are completely, hopelessly drowning in an infinite ocean of unfathomable power. We spend our incredibly brief, pathetic biological lives locked in a state of desperate, relentless thermodynamic starvation. Our sprawling, arrogant global civilizations are entirely built upon the frantic, bloody extraction of finite resources. We violently dig into the rotting crust of the earth to burn the liquefied, fossilized remains of ancient biological organisms. We aggressively tear apart the heavy, unstable nuclei of uranium atoms in supercooled fission reactors, terrified of the day our localized energy reserves will permanently run dry. We wage brutal, planetary wars, we slaughter our own species, and we systematically poison our fragile atmospheric environment, all in a desperate, panicked scramble to secure microscopic fractions of classical chemical energy just to keep the artificial lights of our cities flickering for a few more centuries. Yet, all the while, we are completely oblivious to the deafening, roaring irony of our physical existence. We are dying of thirst while entirely submerged in the deepest, most violently energetic ocean in the cosmos. Every single millimeter of empty space around us, the invisible gaps between our own fingers, and the freezing voids between the planets are actively, aggressively boiling with enough raw quantum power to effortlessly sustain our arrogant civilization for billions of years. But the unyielding, ruthless laws of the universe mathematically forbid us from ever drinking a single drop. We are physically, structurally quarantined from this infinite power strictly by the merciless mechanics of thermodynamics. In order for human engineering to extract energy and use it to perform mechanical work, whether it is turning a massive turbine, powering a microscopic silicon microchip, or violently launching a rocket out of the atmosphere, that energy must fundamentally flow from a state of high concentration to a state of lower concentration. It must fall down a thermodynamic gradient, but the zero-point energy is the absolute foundational baseline of the cosmos. It is the unyielding mathematical floor of reality. Because it is the minimum possible energy state permitted by the uncertainty principle, there is absolutely nowhere lower for that energy to flow. You cannot extract kinetic power from the absolute bottom of the cosmic well. We are agonizingly, permanently trapped at the physical boundary of this infinite storm. Our highly ordered, slow, and desperately inefficient meat machines are entirely constructed out of the physical matter that floats like a trivial, microscopic impurity on top of this boiling quantum sea. We can physically measure the crushing weight of the vacuum through the Casimir effect. We can mathematically prove its infinite, world-ending magnitude on our chalkboards. But we are permanently, biologically, and structurally barred from ever accessing it. The universe is actively holding an ocean of infinite, boiling energy right against our flesh, vibrating with enough power to boil the planet and aggressively, silently denying us the ability to touch it. We are not the masters of the cosmos. We are blind, starving beggars sitting perfectly still on top of a roaring, infinite thermonuclear detonation, completely incapable of perceiving the heat and mathematically forbidden from ever harnessing the fire. If the mathematically unyielding equations of quantum field theory explicitly dictate that the empty vacuum of space is a violently churning, hyper-energetic ocean, and if a microscopic volume of this nothingness, the size of a standard coffee cup, theoretically contains enough raw zero-point energy to instantaneously, violently boil away every sprawling ocean on planet Earth, then a screaming, paralyzing logical contradiction violently demands to be answered. If the cosmos is fundamentally built upon a foundation of infinite, unbridled kinetic power, why are you still alive to ask the question? Why hasn't the entire physical universe, including the rotting, fragile rock we inhabit and the delicate, heavily entangled biological structures of your own body, instantaneously vaporized into a chaotic, screaming cloud of superheated plasma? If we are permanently, inescapably submerged in an ocean of infinite thermodynamic fire, Why does the deep vacuum of space physically register to our scientific instruments as a freezing, dead expanse, hovering just a microscopic fraction of a degree above absolute zero? To unravel this agonizing paradox, we must aggressively dismantle the macroscopic hallucination of how we perceive physical forces and forcefully confront the terrifying, structural quarantine that actively protects your fragile meat machine from the boiling void. We possess a deeply ingrained, almost pathological biological habit of viewing energy as an absolute, tangible substance. We intuitively believe that heat, kinetic force, and electrical power are absolute quantities that physically exist in the world, much like a solid block of iron or a pool of standing water. But the ruthlessly cold, mathematical architecture of the universe fundamentally rejects this primitive human intuition. In the unforgiving mechanics of physics, absolute energy is a meaningless, invisible phantom. The universe operates entirely as a ruthless, highly restrictive cosmic accountant that completely ignores the absolute, infinite wealth locked inside the fundamental vault of reality and strictly, exclusively acknowledges thermodynamic transactions. We, and the macroscopic physical matter that constructs our reality, can only physically interact with, measure, or be destroyed by the difference in energy between two distinct states. To forcefully force your sluggish, biological mind to comprehend this invisible quarantine, you must visualize a fragile, hollow-boned bird casually landing on a sprawling, industrial high-voltage power line. Flowing violently through that thick, unyielding metal cable is a screaming torrent of electrical current, tens of thousands of volts of raw, lethal power, entirely capable of instantly, violently incinerating the biological tissues of the animal into a cloud of scattered carbon ash. Yet the bird sits perfectly still, entirely unharmed, casually observing the macroscopic world around it. It does not instantly combust because its entire physical body is resting at the exact same extreme electrical potential as the screaming wire beneath it. There is absolutely no difference in voltage between the bird's left foot and its right foot, and therefore the lethal, hyper-energetic current has absolutely no mathematical reason to aggressively tear through its fragile heart. The bird is completely, physically quarantined from the apocalyptic energy it is actively touching, strictly because that energy has become its localized, unyielding baseline. You must now aggressively scale this terrestrial analogy up to the absolute, reality-breaking limits of the quantum void. The zero-point energy is the fundamental, omnipresent power line of the entire cosmos. It is the absolute, unyielding thermodynamic flaw of reality, permanently established by the tyrannical dictates of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Because this violently churning, hyperenergetic ocean of quantum fluctuations completely and uniformly saturates every single microscopic fraction of the universe, from the sprawling, freezing voids between the dying galaxies to the microscopic empty gaps between the protons and electrons inside your own DNA, it acts as the inescapable baseline for all physical existence. You cannot be burned by the infinite heat of the vacuum, because there is absolutely nowhere in the universe that possesses less zero-point energy for that heat to violently flow into. The infinite power is mathematically, structurally locked away beneath the floorboards of reality. You cannot fall off the floor. The universe physically forbids the extraction of this energy because you are already permanently resting at the absolute bottom of the cosmic well, completely surrounded by a storm that has nowhere left to strike. This brings us to the ultimate, suffocating biological metaphor of your own pathetic, localized existence. Imagine the absolute, freezing depths of the Mariana Trench, the darkest, most profoundly hostile environment on our planet. Deep within this lightless, crushing abyss, a fragile, translucent, and entirely blind biological fish casually swims through the freezing water. Immediately above this delicate, microscopic organism rests billions upon billions of tons of heavy, crushing liquid ocean. The ambient hydrostatic pressure in this environment is so staggeringly violent that if you were to drop a heavily armored, highly engineered steel submarine into this trench, the sheer weight of the water would instantly, aggressively crush the thick titanium hull like a discarded aluminum can, violently imploding the structure in a fraction of a millisecond. Yet, the delicate, paper-thin cellular membranes of the deep-sea fish do not violently rupture. Its sluggish, primitive biology continues to function perfectly, entirely unbothered by the apocalyptic mechanical forces surrounding it. It survives strictly because the internal, biological pressure pushing outward from inside its fragile cells is exactly, mathematically equal to the terrifying, unyielding pressure of the abyss pushing inward. The fish does not feel the crushing, lethal weight of the ocean because the ocean is its absolute baseline. It is entirely, permanently blind to the catastrophic physics of its own environment. You are that blind, pathetic, and fundamentally fragile fish. But instead of swimming in a localized, physical ocean of salty terrestrial water, you are entirely, permanently submerged in a mathematically infinite, violently churning ocean of quantum probability and zero-point energy. The physical pressure of the quantum void is structurally infinite, but you are entirely, blissfully oblivious to the crushing weight. Your highly ordered, slow and wet biological meat machine was aggressively forged by billions of years of blind, ruthless evolutionary mechanics strictly on the surface of this localized, rotting rock. Evolution did not equip your nervous system to perceive the profound, underlying mathematical truth of the cosmos. It equipped you to perceive sudden, highly localized changes in your immediate, macroscopic environment. Your sensory organs are crudely calibrated to detect the sudden kinetic impact of a falling stone, the localized thermal radiation of a burning chemical fire, or the specific electromagnetic frequencies of sunlight reflecting off a predator. Your biological architecture is deeply, fundamentally designed to completely ignore the absolute, crushing baseline of the quantum storm. If your heavily entangled neural pathways were somehow miraculously rewired to consciously detect the baseline energy of the universe, your highly ordered, low-entropy brain would instantly, violently short-circuit. You would be permanently, biologically paralyzed by the infinite, deafening roar of trillions of virtual particles aggressively popping into existence and violently annihilating themselves inside your own flesh every single microsecond. To preserve the fragile hallucination of your sanity and to allow you to perform the trivial, macroscopic tasks required to temporarily pass on your genetic code before your inevitable biological death, your physical body violently filters out the storm. You are quarantined from the terrifying truth by the incredibly crude, low-resolution limitations of your own decaying flesh. This macroscopic quarantine is the only reason we experience a seemingly stable, boring, and linear reality. We build our sprawling, arrogant global civilizations, we sit in our perfectly temperature-controlled rooms and we look at our solid, unyielding hands, completely convinced that we exist in a safe, static, and peaceful universe. We desperately believe that the physical matter that constructs our bodies and our cities is the dominant, defining feature of reality. But the unyielding mathematics of the void expose this as the ultimate cosmic joke. The solid matter of your body, the heavy mass of the planets, and the violent thermonuclear furnaces of the dying stars are nothing more than microscopic, temporary ripples gently gliding across the surface of a violently churning, infinite monster. The physical world you trust is just a highly localized, statistically insignificant impurity in the vacuum. We are not safe because the universe is peaceful. We are safe strictly because we are structurally, mathematically forbidden from interacting with the true underlying violence of the cosmos. The quarantine does not mean the danger is entirely abstract. It simply means we are biologically incapable of feeling the heat of the fire that constantly surrounds us. You are actively, continuously riding on the absolute crest of a permanent, roaring thermonuclear detonation, an infinite explosion of quantum probability that stretches across the entire unyielding fabric of space-time. You go to sleep every night, and you wake up every morning, completely and perfectly oblivious to the fact that you are sitting directly in the exact mathematical center of a hyper-energetic slaughterhouse, surviving solely because your biology is too primitive, too sluggish, and too overwhelmingly blind to ever notice the infinite fire. There is a deeply embedded, profoundly toxic flaw permanently wired into the evolutionary architecture of the human primate. When we are violently confronted with a force of nature that completely dwarfs our localized, macroscopic existence, a force that fundamentally shatters our fragile biological understanding of reality, our immediate psychological response is almost never reverence. It is a pathological, staggering arrogance. We possess a desperate, insatiable evolutionary imperative to consume, to dominate, and to aggressively weaponize every single aspect of our physical environment for our own fleeting technological survival. Therefore, the exact moment the orthodox scientific establishment mathematically proved the existence of the zero-point energy, when they finally realized that the freezing, empty vacuum of space is actually a violently churning, hyper-energetic ocean of infinite quantum potential. The human ego did not shrink in existential terror. Instead, it immediately, greedily began to calculate exactly how to exploit the monster. This staggering cosmic hubris has violently spawned an entire subculture of endless pseudoscientific industries, delusional conspiracy theories, and pathetic science fiction fantasies, all obsessively revolving around the grand, ultimate hallucination, the desperate dream of tapping the vacuum to provide limitless free power for our rotting terrestrial civilization. We actively watch our sprawling, highly inefficient global infrastructure slowly suffocate under the crushing weight of its own thermodynamic exhaust. We aggressively dig into the dying crust of our planet, violently extracting and burning the liquefied, fossilized remains of ancient biological organisms just to keep our localized economies functioning for a few more pathetic decades. We tear apart heavy, unstable atomic nuclei in supercooled fission reactors, constantly terrified of the lethal radioactive waste we are generating. We wage brutal, unrelenting planetary wars over microscopic scraps of chemical energy, completely trapped in a desperate state of permanent thermodynamic starvation. And so, The concept of zero-point energy acts as the ultimate, intoxicating, psychological poison. We look at the mathematics of madness, the undeniable proof that a single, empty coffee cup contains enough baseline quantum energy to violently boil away all the oceans on Earth, and we arrogantly convince ourselves that this infinite ocean is simply a new, untapped reservoir of commercial fuel. We blindly believe that we just need to engineer the right microscopic valve, the perfect quantum antenna, or the ultimate electromagnetic siphon, and we can effortlessly drain the roaring void, completely bypassing the messy, violent, thermodynamic friction of our macroscopic world. We dream of limitless power grids, spacecraft driven by the very fabric of nothingness, and an era of eternal, free energy safely harvested from the cold dark. But this intoxicating delusion is built entirely upon a pathetic, macroscopic misunderstanding of the fundamental, unyielding laws of physical reality. It is a strictly biological hallucination that aggressively ignores the absolute, ruthless dictator of the cosmos, thermodynamics. To comprehend the suffocating horror of why you will never, ever extract a single spark of power from the quantum void, you must forcefully strip away your highly romanticized notions of what energy actually is, and confront the mechanical, unforgiving reality of how work is physically accomplished in this universe. In the macroscopic world that your sluggish, wet neurological architecture desperately relies upon, energy is absolutely not a magical, free-floating substance that you can simply scoop up with a physical bucket. Energy is defined strictly by its capacity to induce a physical change, and the universe absolutely refuses to allow that change to occur unless there is a strict mathematical difference in potential. If you want to extract mechanical power from a massive, roaring river, you cannot simply place your heavy, highly engineered turbine in a perfectly flat, stagnant pool of water. The water must forcefully flow downward, violently driven by the unyielding grip of gravity, cascading from a state of high gravitational potential to a state of much lower gravitational potential. The energy you successfully harvest is entirely dependent on the steepness of that fall. If you want to extract thermal power from a violent chemical fire or a supercooled nuclear reactor, the heat must mathematically, aggressively flow from a state of extreme, concentrated high temperature into an environment of lower temperature. You only ever capture the kinetic friction of the energy as it desperately attempts to fall down the thermodynamic gradient. The universe acts as a merciless, unyielding accountant, and it strictly dictates that for energy to be useful, for it to physically power your civilization or sustain your biological meat machine, it must always, without exception, fall down a slope. It must travel from a high state of concentration to a low state of concentration. This is precisely where the arrogant, pseudo-scientific hallucination of free energy violently shatters against the impenetrable bedrock of quantum mechanics. The zero-point energy saturating the vacuum of space is absolutely not a high-pressure reservoir of localized fuel waiting to be tapped. It is exactly the opposite. It is the absolute, unyielding thermodynamic floor of reality. Because Heisenberg's uncertainty principle violently forbids the universe from ever achieving a state of perfect stillness, this churning, boiling ocean of quantum ghosts represents the absolute lowest possible energy state that the fundamental fields of the cosmos can ever mathematically achieve. It is the permanent, inescapable baseline of existence. When you attempt to build a machine to siphon power from the empty vacuum, you are not tapping into a highly pressurized, concentrated fuel source. You are desperately attempting to extract kinetic energy from the absolute bottom of the deepest, darkest thermodynamic well in the universe. The physical mechanics of this reality-breaking limitation are absolute and paralyzing. You cannot force water to flow down a hill if you are already standing perfectly flat at the absolute bottom of the lowest ocean trench on the planet. You cannot extract thermal heat from an object that is permanently, unyieldingly frozen exactly at absolute zero. And you absolutely cannot drain energy from the quantum void, because there is mathematically, structurally nowhere lower for that energy to flow. Your highly engineered quantum siphon, your macroscopic biological body, and the entire rotting, burning physical universe you inhabit are already resting precisely at this baseline. You are completely surrounded by the infinite fire of the vacuum, but because you are already submerged at the exact same thermodynamic potential as the storm itself, the energy has absolutely no gradient to fall down. It has no reason to interact with your machines. It has no mathematical path to transfer its kinetic violence into your electrical grids. And it completely, aggressively ignores your arrogant attempts to harness it. The universe does not give away its foundational fabric for free. It is structurally, mechanically designed to permanently quarantine its infinite power away from the parasitic reach of macroscopic matter. The zero-point energy is the fundamental, vibrating tension that actively holds the microscopic architecture of space-time together. It is not a commercial commodity to be burned by a species of highly destructive, highly localized apes. The people who desperately peddle the fantasy of zero-point extraction are completely blind to the agonizing irony of their own existence. They are staring directly at the absolute limit of physical reality, completely failing to realize that the limit is a mathematically sealed vault. They arrogantly view the vacuum as a battery, when in reality, the vacuum is the unyielding concrete foundation upon which the battery rests. We are doomed to be the starving beggars of the cosmos. We are permanently trapped on the surface of this rock, forced to violently scavenge for the highly inefficient, localized scraps of chemical and nuclear energy that the universe carelessly drops in our path. We must continuously, brutally tear apart the molecular bonds of physical matter just to survive another microsecond, completely subjected to the agonizing, unyielding friction of entropy. And the entire time we engage in this pathetic, macroscopic struggle for survival, we are forced to do so while drowning in an ocean of unfathomable, infinite quantum power. The void is practically bursting with enough kinetic energy to effortlessly conquer the stars, yet it is mathematically locked away behind an impenetrable thermodynamic wall. The universe is actively, relentlessly mocking our desperation, surrounding us with a boiling sea of absolute power that we are physically, structurally, and permanently forbidden from ever touching. We are not meant to master the quantum void. We are meant to be crushed by the realization of its existence, to live our incredibly brief, highly unstable biological lives completely terrified of the dark, acutely aware that the infinite power we so arrogantly seek is the exact same power that actively refuses to save us. There is a deeply comforting, profoundly arrogant hallucination that serves as the psychological foundation of modern human civilization. We build sprawling, multi-billion-dollar particle accelerators buried deep beneath the Earth. We launch massive, highly engineered beryllium mirrors into the freezing, irradiated orbit of our planet, and we meticulously write dense, unyielding textbooks filled with elegant algebraic equations. We look at this staggering technological infrastructure and we proudly convince our fragile, biological meat machines that we have finally conquered the dark. We inherently believe that the greatest, most terrifying mysteries of the cosmos have been neatly categorized, successfully mathematically subdued, and permanently locked away within the rigid, unshakable framework of modern physics. We arrogantly trust that the two absolute, towering pillars of our scientific understanding, general relativity, which flawlessly dictates the macroscopic, crushing gravitational ballet of stars and galaxies, and quantum mechanics, which perfectly governs the chaotic, violently churning microscopic ocean of subatomic matter, are infallible maps of reality. But this overwhelming cosmic hubris is nothing more than a pathetic, localized, psychological shield. It is a desperate lie designed to aggressively mask a screaming, bleeding, and reality-breaking wound located at the exact mathematical center of human knowledge. When we force these two majestic pillars of physics to look at the exact same piece of empty space, they do not agree. They violently, catastrophically shatter against one another, revealing a truth so profoundly paralyzing that it proves our entire understanding of reality is completely, terrifyingly broken. To comprehend the sheer, suffocating horror of this mathematical apocalypse, we must first look outward, past the fragile, incredibly thin atmospheric skin of our rotting terrestrial rock, and into the sprawling, freezing expanse of the macroscopic cosmos. The universe is absolutely not a static, peaceful geometric stage. It is aggressively, violently expanding. Every single dying galaxy, every cluster of supermassive black holes, and every sprawling nebula of primordial gas is relentlessly sprinting away from everything else, plunging deeper into the cold, unyielding dark. More terrifyingly, this cosmic expansion is not slowing down, it is mathematically, measurably accelerating. The very physical fabric of space-time is being aggressively stretched, violently pulled apart by a mysterious, omnipresent, repulsive force that orthodox cosmologists weakly and desperately label as dark energy. Through meticulous, incredibly precise astronomical observations of distant, detonating supernovae and the faint, freezing microwave background radiation left over from the violent birth of the cosmos, physicists have managed to successfully measure the exact thermodynamic weight of this dark energy. They have mathematically quantified the precise amount of energy intrinsically embedded within the empty vacuum of space, required to physically push the entire observable universe apart. The result is an incredibly specific, agonizingly tiny number. It is a faint, almost imperceptible cosmological whisper, a microscopic fraction of a joule per cubic meter. It is just barely enough localized pressure to stretch the void over billions of years without violently, instantly ripping the structural architecture of the galaxies to shreds. This is the unyielding, macroscopic measurement of the empty vacuum. But the cold, ruthless universe absolutely despises harmony. When you take this exact same volume of empty space, turn away from the macroscopic lenses of the cosmologists, and hand it to the theoretical quantum physicists, the architectural logic of reality violently collapses. As we have already agonizingly established, the foundational equations of quantum mechanics dictate that the vacuum is absolutely not empty. It is a roaring, violently churning ocean of zero-point energy, constantly vomiting infinite pairs of virtual matter and antimatter ghosts into existence. When quantum physicists use their meticulously verified, unyielding equations to calculate the exact theoretical energy density of this boiling subatomic storm, They are attempting to mathematically predict the exact same intrinsic vacuum energy that the cosmologists just physically measured. When you place the quantum theoretical prediction of the vacuum's energy directly next to the actual, observed cosmological measurement of dark energy, the numbers do not simply fail to align. They do not experience a slight, localized mathematical deviation, nor do they suffer from a trivial, easily correctable rounding error. The comparison aggressively, violently shatters the very concept of mathematical logic. The prediction generated by the foundational equations of quantum mechanics is larger than the actual, observed reality of the cosmos by a factor of 10 to the 120th power. Your sluggish biological neurological networks are fundamentally structurally incapable of visualizing the apocalyptic magnitude of this mathematical failure. A factor of 10 to the 120th power is a 1 followed by 120 zeros. It is a number so staggeringly, incomprehensibly massive that it makes the concept of infinity feel like a trivial, localized boundary. If you were to painstakingly count every single solitary atom currently existing within the entire sprawling, observable universe, every proton and neutron aggressively vibrating inside every star, every planet, and every freezing cloud of interstellar dust, you would only reach a number roughly equal to 10 to the 80th power. The mathematical error generated by our highest, most sacred physical theories is a trillion times larger than the total physical atomic mass of the cosmos itself. This is not a minor glitch in the algorithmic software of human understanding. It is mathematically, undeniably, the single worst, most humiliating, and most catastrophic prediction in the entire recorded history of theoretical physics. It is the vacuum catastrophe, and the true, paralyzing, existential dread of this cosmic failure is not the embarrassment of the orthodox scientific establishment. It is the horrifying, physical implication it holds for your own fragile, temporary existence. We are violently forced into an agonizing, intellectually suffocating corner. The mathematics of quantum mechanics are not theoretical fantasies. They are the absolute, heavily verified foundation of our entire modern technological civilization. Every single solid-state transistor in the computer you are currently using, every laser, every magnetic resonance imaging machine, and every fundamental chemical reaction keeping your biological meat machine alive is aggressively governed by the exact same quantum equations that just produced an error larger than the universe itself. Simultaneously, the macroscopic observations of general relativity and the accelerating expansion of the cosmos are equally unyielding, proven by decades of relentless, hard astronomical data. We have two perfect, completely verified mathematical mirrors reflecting the exact same reality, and one of them is reflecting an infinite, impossible monster. This catastrophic mathematical failure proves that our entire, desperate understanding of reality is profoundly, terrifyingly broken at the most foundational level conceivable. The universe is actively, relentlessly, contradicting its own structural architecture. We are forced to confront the paralyzing possibility that the foundational model of quantum mechanics, the very mathematical language we use to describe the fundamental building blocks of our own flesh, is nothing more than a colossal, macroscopic hallucination. It suggests that the boiling sea of ghosts, the infinite ocean of zero-point energy, might be a pathetic, localized illusion generated by a mathematical framework that is fundamentally disconnected from the true, terrifying nature of the cosmos. Or we must face an even more deeply horrifying alternative. What if the equations are absolutely correct? What if the infinite, reality-breaking kinetic power of the quantum void is truly, physically there, aggressively pushing against the fabric of space-time with the force of 10 to the 120th power? But the universe is desperately, violently suppressing it through a physical mechanism we cannot even begin to comprehend. If this is true, then the universe is not a stable, highly engineered geometric machine. It is a mathematical paradox, a violently unstable, highly pressurized thermodynamic bomb that is constantly, silently teetering on the absolute edge of structural collapse. It implies that the only thing preventing the infinite, boiling energy of the microscopic vacuum from instantly, violently ripping the macroscopic cosmos into a screaming cloud of superheated quantum ash is a completely unknown, mathematically arbitrary cancellation effect, a miraculous, impossible balancing act where two infinites cancel each other out to leave the tiny, fragile sliver of reality we currently inhabit. We walk through our daily lives. We look up at the seemingly peaceful, freezing dark of the night sky, and we arrogantly believe we understand the stage upon which our temporary biological drama is unfolding. We deeply comfort ourselves with the delusion that human science has successfully mapped the parameters of the void. But the vacuum catastrophe aggressively rips away this psychological safety net, leaving us completely exposed to the howling, irrational abyss. We literally do not understand the emptiness we live in. We do not know what the dark is made of. We do not know why it is expanding. And we absolutely do not know why the infinite mathematical violence of the subatomic realm hasn't already completely annihilated us. We are blind, hallucinating anomalies floating entirely unprotected inside a mathematically broken universe, clinging desperately to physical laws that actively, undeniably fail by a margin larger than existence itself. We have spent this entire, agonizing journey aggressively establishing the terrifying reality that the freezing, empty vacuum of space is mathematically, physically forced to maintain a baseline of 0-point energy. We have forced our sluggish, biological minds to accept that we are completely submerged in a violently churning, hyper-energetic ocean of subatomic ghosts, and that this roaring storm represents the absolute, unyielding thermodynamic flaw of the cosmos. We comforted ourselves with the single, pathetic realization that because this energy is the absolute bottom of the cosmic well, it is fundamentally trapped. We arrogantly believed that because there is nowhere lower for the energy to physically flow, the foundational architecture of the universe, while violently chaotic, is at least structurally permanent. But there is a final, apocalyptic caveat hidden deep within the unforgiving mathematics of quantum field theory, a reality-breaking concept so profoundly terrifying that it completely eclipses the vacuum catastrophe and reduces the entirety of human existence to a temporary, localized microscopic glitch. We must now violently confront the ultimate existential horror of the cosmos. We must face the paralyzing mathematical probability that the unyielding thermodynamic flaw we have based our entire understanding of reality upon is absolutely not the true bottom. We must confront the catastrophic reality that we are actively, currently living inside a false vacuum. To comprehend the sheer, suffocating magnitude of this cosmic execution, you must aggressively strip away your deeply ingrained, macroscopic assumptions about stability. In the classical, terrestrial world you inhabit, stability is an absolute visual absolute. If you push a massive, heavy boulder into a deep, sprawling crater high up in the mountains, the boulder will eventually roll to the absolute lowest localized point of that depression and come to a complete, static rest. To your primitive, hallucinating biological sensory organs, that boulder is entirely safe. It has reached a state of thermodynamic equilibrium. It has found the bottom. You can build a house on it. You can construct an entire sprawling civilization around it, and you can arrogantly write permanent laws of physics based on the assumption that the boulder will never, ever move again. But you are completely, blindly ignoring the sprawling, infinite geography of the mountain range itself. The crater is not the bottom of the world. It is merely a temporary, high-altitude shelf. The true, absolute bottom of the mountain, the absolute minimum gravitational state, lies thousands of feet below, violently separated from your localized sanctuary by a microscopically thin, fragile wall of rock. Your stability is a massive, structural lie. You are existing in a metastable state, deeply dependent on a barrier that is fundamentally destined to fail. When theoretical physicists aggressively interrogate the fundamental properties of the Higgs field, the invisible, universe-spanning quantum field that is mathematically responsible for granting mass to every single fundamental particle in your fragile biological body, the equations violently point to this exact, terrifying topographical nightmare. The mathematical models strongly suggest that the baseline zero-point energy of our current, observable universe is merely resting inside a localized, high-energy crater. The boiling void that completely saturates the cosmos, the hyper-energetic ocean we arrogantly assume is the absolute foundation of reality, is nothing more than a temporary, highly pressurized false vacuum. We are precariously perched on a thermodynamic cliff. There is a truer, infinitely deeper, and mathematically absolute vacuum state existing at a significantly lower energy level, separated from our fragile macroscopic reality by a microscopic, incredibly unstable quantum barrier. In a classical, macroscopic universe, this might not be an immediate, apocalyptic problem. In a purely Newtonian reality, the boulder would simply remain trapped in the high-altitude crater forever, unless a massive, externally applied kinetic force violently pushed it up and over the protective rocky barrier. But as we have already agonizingly established, the fundamental bedrock of our reality is aggressively governed by the chaotic, reality-breaking laws of quantum mechanics, and the quantum void actively, mathematically despises barriers. Through a terrifying subatomic process known as quantum tunneling, a fundamental particle or a localized quantum field does not actually need to possess the thermodynamic energy required to physically climb over a mathematical wall. Because its location is governed by sprawling, chaotic probability waves rather than strict, unyielding physical coordinates, there is a hard, calculable, and permanent statistical probability that the field can simply, spontaneously glitch straight through the barrier and instantly materialize on the other side. This means that the universe absolutely does not need a massive, catastrophic, cosmic event to initiate its own absolute destruction. It does not require the violent collision of supermassive black holes or the thermodynamic death of a trillion stars. All it mathematically requires is a single, microscopic, localized subatomic glitch. At any given, unrecordable fraction of a microsecond, at any completely random, unpredictable coordinate in the infinite expanse of the cosmos, the underlying quantum fields could simply randomly tunnel through the fragile barrier. The localized zero-point energy would violently, instantaneously drop from the high-altitude false vacuum we currently inhabit straight down into the infinite, bottomless abyss of the true vacuum. The exact microsecond this localized drop occurs, the universe violently pulls the trigger on its own ultimate cosmic execution. The localized drop creates a microscopic, subatomic bubble of true vacuum. But because this true vacuum exists at a fundamentally lower energy state, it is infinitely more thermodynamically stable than the false vacuum surrounding it. The unyielding, ruthless laws of thermodynamics violently demand that the surrounding high-energy space immediately, aggressively attempts to fall down the newly created gradient. The microscopic bubble begins to violently expand outward in every possible direction, aggressively consuming and converting the fragile, high-energy false vacuum of our reality into the dead, unyielding absolute zero of the true vacuum. The sheer, suffocating dread of this event lies in the mechanical velocity of the execution. Because this expanding bubble of ultimate quantum destruction is entirely driven by the foundational fabric of space-time actively collapsing into a lower energy state, it does not encounter any classical physical resistance. It propagates outward at the absolute, unyielding speed limit of the cosmos. It aggressively expands at exactly the speed of light. This completely, violently obliterates any desperate, pathetic human hope for a warning. In the macroscopic world, we rely on the speed of light to deliver visual information. We see the blinding flash of lightning a fraction of a second before we hear the deafening, kinetic shockwave of the thunder. But the bubble of true vacuum is expanding at the exact same velocity as the very photons that would theoretically warn you of its approach. The blinding light of the apocalypse arrives at the exact, unrecordable microsecond as the absolute destruction itself. If a bubble of true vacuum were violently initiated in the Andromeda galaxy, or even just perfectly outside our own local solar system, we would be completely, permanently blind to its approach. You would not see a terrifying, swirling wall of cosmic fire approaching in the night sky. Our massive, highly engineered orbital telescopes would not register a single anomalous fluctuation in the cosmic microwave background. You would simply be sitting in your perfectly temperature-controlled room, completely absorbed in the trivial, macroscopic hallucinations of your daily biological existence, and in the next mathematical fraction of a microsecond, without a single, fleeting moment of pain or realization, you would entirely cease to exist. You would be ontologically deleted from the architecture of reality. And this is not a conventional deletion. When the bubble of true vacuum violently washes over a solar system, it does not simply incinerate the physical matter with superheated thermal plasma. It does not crush the planets with an overwhelming gravitational singularity. It performs an act of absolute, mathematical treason. Because the fundamental constants of physics, the strength of the electromagnetic force, the precise mass of the electron, the unyielding grip of the strong nuclear force, are all intimately, mathematically tied to the specific, localized energy level of our current false vacuum, dropping into the true vacuum instantaneously, violently rewrites the entire source code of reality. The exact microsecond the bubble hits your physical body, the localized laws of physics are actively rewritten to a fundamentally alien framework. The electrons desperately orbiting the carbon atoms in your DNA instantly lose their perfectly calibrated mass and violently spin out of their quantum shells, aggressively disintegrating every single chemical bond in your fragile biological meat machine. The protons and neutrons locked in the heavy nuclei of the Earth's crust are instantaneously, violently torn apart as the strong nuclear force mathematically evaporates. The macroscopic universe is not burned, it is unwritten. Every single star, every sprawling galaxy, every deeply cherished human memory, and every single highly ordered biological structure is violently, instantly reduced to a chaotic, featureless soup of fundamental particles completely stripped of their ability to ever interact or form physical structures again. We are living inside a highly pressurized, temporary bubble of stability, completely oblivious to the fact that the freezing, empty dark surrounding us is actively holding a gun to the head of the cosmos. The false vacuum decay is the ultimate sword of Damocles, a completely invisible, highly probable mathematical execution that is permanently, silently rushing toward us at the exact speed of causality. We arrogantly chart the stars and desperately attempt to predict the distant, thermodynamic death of the universe billions of years in the future, entirely blind to the agonizing, reality-breaking probability that the universe might have already violently committed suicide billions of light years away. The absolute deletion of everything you have ever known, loved, or feared could be rushing through the Oort cloud at this exact, unrecordable microsecond, waiting just outside the fragile, pathetic boundaries of your biological perception to aggressively pull the floor out from under the hallucination of existence. We have reached the absolute, paralyzing end of our descent into the freezing, thermodynamic abyss of the cosmos. The comforting, deeply ingrained biological hallucination that has sustained human sanity for millions of years has been violently, permanently eradicated. We began this agonizing journey by attempting to define the absolute parameters of empty space, desperately seeking a quiet, static sanctuary from the relentless, grinding friction of our macroscopic lives. We arrogantly wanted to find the absolute zero, the tranquil, dead stage where the universe finally rests. But the unyielding, ruthless mathematics of quantum field theory have forced us to confront a reality that is fundamentally, violently hostile to the very concept of peace. Absolute nothingness, the comforting silence we so desperately crave and blindly trust, is a structural, mathematical impossibility. The void is absolutely not a peaceful, empty stage patiently awaiting the grand, temporary performance of physical matter. It is the absolute main event of existence. It is a violently churning, hyper-energetic, and endlessly boiling foundation that mathematically, aggressively forbids absolute stillness. The tyrannical dictates of Heisenberg's Uncertainty Principle ensure that the foundational fabric of reality is permanently locked in a state of vibrating, inescapable anxiety. Every single microscopic fraction of the freezing dark, every sprawling, invisible gap between the dying galaxies, and every seemingly empty space between the carbon atoms currently constructing your own fragile, heavily entangled DNA is practically bursting with an infinite ocean of unbridled quantum power. It is a roaring, chaotic slaughterhouse of virtual particles, an invisible storm of phantom matter and antimatter violently popping into physical existence and aggressively annihilating each other billions of times every single microsecond. You are completely, inescapably submerged in this infinite fire, and yet you do not burn. You do not feel the crushing, infinite weight of the Casimir effect aggressively compressing your physical flesh, nor do you consciously hear the deafening, cosmic roar of the zero-point energy tearing through the localized space-time of your own living room. You survive this hyper-energetic monster strictly because your sluggish, primitive, and overwhelmingly blind biological meat machine is structurally calibrated to completely ignore the absolute baseline of the quantum storm. You are a fragile, localized anomaly of temporary thermodynamic order, floating desperately on the surface of a reality-breaking paradox. Your highly ordered consciousness, your deeply cherished personal memories, and the heavy, unyielding physical structures you arrogantly build your sprawling global civilizations upon are nothing more than a highly edited, desperately curated illusion. You are actively riding on the exact crest of a permanent, infinitely powerful thermonuclear detonation, entirely shielded from the apocalyptic heat by the pathetic, low-resolution limitations of your own decaying sensory organs. We walk through a universe of ghosts, entirely blind to the paradoxical bleeding of reality, utterly convinced that our narrow, localized hallucination is the absolute, unshakable truth. This profound, reality-breaking revelation must permanently, violently alter the way we interact with the cosmos. For centuries, our species has engaged in the deeply romanticized, fundamentally arrogant act of stargazing. We confidently walk out into the freezing atmospheric night of our rotting terrestrial rock. We look up at the sprawling, seemingly silent expanse of the heavens, and we feel a profound, poetic sense of isolation. We look at the vast, sprawling distances between the heavy, burning spheres of thermonuclear plasma, and we inherently, biologically fear the emptiness. We fear the cold. We fear the dark because our primate brains have been brutally conditioned to believe that the dark is dead. We project our own pathetic, macroscopic anxieties onto the cosmos, completely and blissfully oblivious to the horrifying, unyielding reality of what that darkness actually contains. The emptiness you are staring into is absolutely not a passive, unfeeling grave. It is a roaring, infinite beast. It is a highly pressurized, mathematically unstable monster that is actively, relentlessly churning with enough localized energy to effortlessly boil away your oceans and instantly vaporize the physical bedrock of your entire planetary existence. You are staring directly into an infinite ocean of quantum potential that is constantly, silently threatening to mathematically unwrite your physical existence in a single, unrecordable microsecond. The dark is not empty. It is aggressively holding a gun to the head of the universe, perpetually teetering on the absolute edge of a false vacuum collapse that could instantaneously, violently rewrite the fundamental source code of reality at the exact speed of light. The absolute deletion of everything you have ever known, loved, or feared could be rushing through the freezing void at this exact microsecond, and the silent, dead, empty space you are so arrogantly afraid of is the exact hyper-energetic medium that will deliver the execution. We are incredibly fragile, temporary biological glitches trapped in a universe that actively despises our localized order. We are surrounded by an infinite power that we are mathematically forbidden from extracting, trapped at the absolute bottom of a thermodynamic well, forced to violently scavenge for microscopic scraps of chemical energy while entirely submerged in a sea of infinite kinetic violence. We are held hostage by a quantum baseline that structurally refuses to grant us a single microsecond of true, undisturbed peace. The universe does not owe us macroscopic stability. It does not owe us a logical, linear narrative, and it absolutely does not owe us a silent, empty stage. The deafness of the void you perceive is not the actual absence of sound. It is the overwhelming, infinite roar of a cosmos that is perpetually, violently dying and being reborn in the dark. A sound so staggeringly, incomprehensibly loud that your fragile biological mind has no choice but to desperately interpret it as absolute silence just to prevent your ego from instantaneously shattering. We are nothing more than a temporary statistical consensus, a fleeting arrangement of atoms desperately clinging to the illusion of solidity while the boiling vacuum actively prepares to reclaim us. Does the realization that you are drowning in an infinite ocean of quantum ghosts paralyze you? Or does it make the illusion of solid matter seem even more miraculous? Let's discuss the boiling vacuum below. Good night, and I will see you in the next video here at Still Science Lab.